Hello there, James.
Hi Pierce, how's it going?
Not too bad. It seems we have another person here with us today.
Today we have a guest called James, and he's the host of the Out of Order Gun Rights podcast. Is that correct, James?
That's correct. How you guys doing?
Not too bad at all. We're conducting this interview over Skype, which is a first for us, so we'll
Yeah.
see how this goes.
Very interesting. Hopefully it'll go good.
I mean, it will. It will go good.
It will go
do
good. It
well.
will.
So, James, you want to just give our audience a bit of background on yourself, maybe just 2 minutes, to speak about what you're passionate about, what you do over there in the States, and what your podcast is about?
Sure. So over here in the States, there's a real big anti-gun movement going on, and every morning I would wake up, I'd be looking at the news, and I'd hear people just describing gun owners in horrible ways. And I've been a gun owner since I was 12 years old, and a firearms enthusiast, and a gun rights activist, and I know lots of people, and the way they were being described just wasn't accurate. I know hundreds of hardworking, honest, compassionate people that own firearms and believe in the right to defend yourself, and they just weren't the evil, racist, uncaring, selfish people the media was painting them out to be. So I started this podcast, and I started interviewing people, and I try to find the people that are furthest from the stereotype that I can. And we just talk for a half hour and find out what I can about them, how they got into firearms, how they feel about the right to self-defense. And so far it's been some really good interviews.
Wonderful. Well, I suppose I might as well start by asking you, how did you get into firearms in the first place? Obviously, it's a very big culture over there in the States, but how did you specifically get interested in firearms?
Yeah, so we have the Boy Scouts here. So for, I guess, starts around age 5 and goes to age 18. And summer camp one year, they had the rifle range, and they had about 100 other things too. You know, I could have learned how to swim, could have learned how to grow 100 different plants, and the two things I loved and spent the whole summer doing was the rifle range and the archery range, and it just kind of grew from there. And you know, it is sort of a rite of passage here, where you get to a certain age, and it's I guess probably generalizing, but around 9 or 10, you kind of get your first pocket knife. Around 11 or 12, you get your first rifle, and you kind of have to prove yourself worthy that you can handle it and be responsible with it. And then,
So
that's
that seems, for our Irish audience anyway, to consider a 14-year-old to have a gun quite extreme, I'd imagine, even if it is a rifle. Why do you?
And
Sorry, go on.
I actually learned yesterday that you guys, the minimum age to buy a rifle in Ireland is 16, and over here it's 18, and they're trying to raise it to 21. So yeah, it was a couple of things I learned. I was surprised at you guys. But
there are many more hoops and ladders, or hoops and ladders. Yeah, what I'm saying, hoops anyway, to jump through to get guns here anyway.
You have to be part of a hunting club, and you have to have a license and such.
Your license has to be renewed every year. I think you can be part of a shooting range either as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of stuff.
And James, you said you got that during Boy Scouts, and you said about how 12-year-olds would get pen knives and then 14-year-olds might get guns. Is that specifically like state specific, like, or would you say that's like America wide?
That would be, I don't know if it's state specific, it's region specific. So like I grew up in New Jersey, that has some of the most strict gun laws in the country. And we have counties. There's 23 counties in New Jersey. I'd say there's about 6 or 7 where it's that kind of culture. And then as you get closer to New York City, it's much less so. You see much fewer camouflage trucks as you get closer to Manhattan. But we all live under the same laws. So it's one of the things they throw around in the media, that it's you just go into the store and buy a gun. But here, if you want to buy a firearm, you have to go to the police, fill out an application, get fingerprinted, which you have to do on a separate day, make a separate appointment for, provide 2 references which must respond, and then you submit all of this to the police, and they do a background check, a mental health background check. You get your firearms ID card that'll allow you to buy a long gun, and then you go to the store and they do another background check, and then you get your gun, and then any firearms you buy after that, you have to go through that. You have to do that at store background check again. So it's not quite as easy as the media makes it out to be.
Yeah, I was about to say, in Europe we would, I suppose, have a stereotypical view of America where effectively you can just stroll into Walmart and they'll have a section for guns, and you just go up and you buy whatever gun of your choosing and 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and there's no background or anything check. But as you were saying, so that's not true, and there is actually quite an extensive process you have to go through.
Right, and it is different by state. So let's say you go over into Pennsylvania, or the next state over for me, you can go into Walmart and they do the background check at the store. Now, it seems like a big difference, right? So you go into Pennsylvania, you can go into Walmart and you can go and you can buy a shotgun and 200 rounds of ammo. But the only difference between New Jersey and Pennsylvania is the amount of time, because you're giving the same government, the same amount of information. And in New Jersey, they put it in a pile and wait. And in Pennsylvania, they type it into the computer. And
right, yeah,
the same day.
But
So
it is fair to say that different states do have looser gun laws. Say, for instance, Texas perhaps might have a lot less stringent gun laws than New Jersey, quite near New York. Would that be fair to say?
That would definitely be fair to say. In fact, we have a couple of different organizations that rate them. If you like guns, these are the states that you want to live in. Arizona, Texas, Florida, they're always high on the list. So,
and if I may ask a personal question, yourself, you as an avid gun owner, what do you own?
Oh, too many to list. I have a couple of AR-15s.
Wow.
I had an AK at one point, but I have, and it's I always make jokes because the anti-gunners are always pushing. They want less guns, and they tend to align themselves with the anti-hunters. And what happens is you create these funny laws that require you to get more guns. So, I have one gun for hunting deer in New Jersey, one gun for hunting deer in Pennsylvania. I can't use they're not switched back and forth. It's illegal to use my New Jersey gun in Pennsylvania. It's illegal to use my Pennsylvania gun in New Jersey.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And then I have another gun to hunt deer in New York. And even if I just hunted in New Jersey, I would still need one gun for deer, one gun for maybe I could get away with using the same one for turkey, but I would need a different one for squirrels. I need a different one for this season for deer. And so, they have a black powder season. So I have a black powder gun for deer. I have the shotgun for deer. I can hunt squirrels with the black powder gun, but I can't use more than a 30 caliber for the squirrels, and I can't use less than a 45 caliber for the deer. So now just to hunt, if you really wanted to hunt, if you were an enthusiastic hunter, you would need 7 different firearms to hunt just in New Jersey. And, so all these guns start piling up on top of each other. And, you could feasibly buy, say, a 243 bolt action rifle. Right? That would be a 24 caliber, I guess, would be about a 5mm rifle. And you could use that to hunt groundhogs, deer, coyotes, but that's not legal in New Jersey. So you kind of create this demand for extra guns by the different laws that you have.
That's assuming you want to hunt everything, though. I mean, you sound like an avid hunter, James. Like, I'm sure the groundhog hunters would be happy with one gun or so on and so forth. But in that vein, I suppose, you being an avid hunter, what is the justification for owning guns that aren't hunting guns, say your AR-15?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. I was actually driving with my dad the other day, and he asked me the same question. He was like, "Why does anyone need an AR-15?" And I don't know, have either of you guys ever hunted deer?
No, there's very few deer left in Ireland. It's a small island, so they all got hunted pretty quickly there during the medieval times.
Gotcha. There's actually still like a a market. Like I can go and book a hunt to Ireland. So I was looking
Oh yeah,
last night.
they certainly exist, but it would usually be more so in the kind of more remote areas, or maybe on the islands off the coast, as far as I'm aware, anyway.
Oh, okay, cool. So there, a lot of times you'll hear the media say no one needs an AR-15 to hunt deer, right? If you need that many rounds, then you're not a good hunter. But the thing is, when you're hunting deer, it doesn't matter how many rounds you have. There is never a second shot. If you miss, the deer is gone and hidden, and you will not see it again for days. So one of the reasons to look at the AR-15 is that it's a very versatile firearm. I can switch out a few parts on my AR-15, make it a 30 caliber rifle that's absolutely perfect for shooting deer. And if I'm hunting in a field where I'm going to be taking 200 or 300 yard shots, I can change the barrel length, I can change the optic, I can use that AR-15 to shoot out to 200, 300 yards. If I'm hunting in really dense woods, I can put a shorter barrel, heavier caliber, and I can hunt that deer in, really densely, well, not populated, but overgrown area. And, I can put a 5-round mag in there, I can put a 30-round mag in there, but it doesn't matter because you're only getting one shot. And the other part of it is defense. It is really an excellent firearm for defense, as you're short in the barrel, you're in close quarters, it's low recoil. If you put a suppressor on it, it's not very loud, and it's easy to maintain, it's easy to clean, it's easy to service. You can take the whole thing apart, put it back together. The guys that train and practice it can do it in under 10 minutes, but with just a lesson or two and a YouTube video, you can take the whole thing apart, put it back together, and clean it in a half hour. So it really helps you become familiar with your weapon, and makes it very practical for defense and for hunting, which kind of goes back to that thing I was saying where you have all these guns, right? If you take an AR-15 or an AR pattern rifle, you could buy that one gun, spend your money on just that gun, and then that's your deer gun, that's your bear gun, that's your home defense gun, that's your coyote gun, it's your groundhog gun, because that .223 caliber that's native for the AR-15, that's one of the smallest, least powerful rounds that you can put in a rifle, which the media likes to say nobody needs anything as powerful as an AR-15, but that's a very, very low-powered round. Bring up a graphic of just a sort of a line of rifle calibers, right? And they start with what they use to hunt groundhogs and coyotes. You got that little .223 round, and they go all the way up to where they shoot, what they use to shoot elephants, and you see how big of a difference there is.
So much elephant hunting in America there.
Yeah, no hunting those here, but
the mammoths are all gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I suppose that kind of brings us on to obviously in certain states within America, hunting is a big thing, but in certain, I'm sure in some of the more metropolitan states, it's less so, and that's where I guess more of the arguments come in around people owning guns because of the Second Amendment and for home defense, as you were talking about. So,
right.
Not even sure how exactly I want to approach this, but why don't you just give us your brief overview about how you interpret the Second Amendment and what you think that means in terms of gun rights?
To me, what I always say is if somebody says they support it, to me it means that you have the right to carry any firearm anywhere at any time for the purposes of defending your life, liberty, and property. And that's the short of it. We have the clause in there about the militia because when you read the historical background, everyone in the country is the militia. And you have your gun to defend yourself, your family, your property, and if the threat is big enough, then your neighbor's going to help. And if it's big enough, the town's going to help. And if it's even bigger, then the whole country's going to help. And that's the militia. Each and every single one of us is the militia. Each and every single one of us is supposed to defend our own lives, our own property, our own liberty. And the real thing there is what the founding fathers saw is that they're looking at this as like, look, we're putting this government together, but we know it's fragile. We know it can become tyrannical in a heartbeat overnight, and that's why everyone needs to be armed, so that if the government becomes tyrannical, the people retain the power. If you have a society where the government has the guns and they, by permission, give firearms to the citizens, then when the government becomes corrupt, then the militia didn't really help to protect liberty.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think 2 points just to work on would be that I suppose when it was written into law, the firearms that are available are very different than the ones that are now. So muskets that you'd have to reload every 15 seconds and put a brush
down. Up to a minute.
Yeah, put the brush down the barrel. They I'm sure couldn't have saw an AR-15 or foresaw an AR-15, and they wouldn't have realized that this could come about. And then secondly, sorry, I'll let you. Yeah, we'll talk about the second point in a minute. I'd like you to address that.
Yeah. So it is a thought that comes up a lot. There was a couple of things. One, Lewis and Clark had a semi-automatic 10-round 45 caliber rifle that they took with them, on the Lewis and Clark expedition. They also had cannons, right?
Right. Yeah, I've heard this point brought up before.
And they had something called the pucker gun, right? Which is, speaks to how people thought back then. This was a 12-shot musket. You kind of worked like a Gatling gun. They hadn't invented Gatling guns yet, but they had the pucker gun. So 12-shot black powder, turret-mounted firearm. It shot round bullets for Christians, square bullets for Muslims, because those were supposed to be more painful. I guess they hadn't figured out ballistics yet. Yeah,
that's like silver bullets for werewolves.
Yeah. And they had grenades, right? So we have grenades, cannons, the pucker gun, and the Lewis and Clark rifle, which has an Italian name that I can't pronounce.
It's okay.
And so it's for sure they had the vision, that it was going to be out there, and even within a short period of time, after the Second Amendment was ratified, they had Gatling guns, and like we didn't start talking about gun control until like really the 1920s, and then and really then again in the 1960s, and every time it came up, it's always about either immigration or race. So there's still men in my town alive that remember the Democratic DNC, Democratic National Committee, 1964, getting ready for a presidential election, and the convention was held in New Jersey, and they said that they were not going to allow the black delegates to attend. So the Southern Democrats said, yeah, we're having it in New Jersey, but the black delegates were not going to allow you into the convention. And so there was protests outside of the convention, and the chiefs of police got together with the attorney general, and it was out of that gun control was spawned. And immigration, we had a whole series of laws limiting what kind of things that you were allowed to have on your person in New York City in 1914 to 1920, where they started banning switchblades, which is, if you think about weapons now, like switchblades are still illegal in most of the country because they were afraid of Italian immigrants bringing over these automatic knives. And
probably reasonably so.
At the time, maybe.
Yeah, right. Well, when you think about it now, it's like, why would you want to start with a half-broken knife? It's like it's that's a fixed blade, but and then we'd have the 60. Oh, and then in the I think it was late 70s, Ronald Reagan, governor of California, right? He eliminates open carry in California. So it really wasn't even a term that anyone was using, right? For the most part, in that same period of time where we're worried about immigration and the civil rights movement, where they can't have laws against black people anymore, so we'll just kind of make character references. He must be of good character, but that in the law, right? So they made it illegal for anyone to carry a gun concealed in the 1960s, but up until the 1980s, they could carry it open, right? And so had the Black Panthers coming in California, walking into the State House, fully armed with loaded weapons, rifles, long guns, semi-automatic, and no one got shot, but they were protesting. They didn't want to get thrown out, so they came with guns. And after that, Ronald Reagan signed a law banning what they now call open carry in California. So, as we go trace back, and a lot of it's really hard to find, but you start finding all of the gun control laws that we have are based on racism or, fear of immigrants from a certain region. And then you had a second question.
Well, yeah, I'd never actually heard about that, so I probably will go do some independent reading about that later because that sounds interesting. But before Seamus moves on to his second point, I would just, I'm curious to know, this thought occurred to me as you were speaking, where do you think the rights stop in terms of the power of the weapon? So obviously, semi-automatic weapons are currently allowed under the law, but do you think there should be any cap on it at all? Like, for instance, should I be able to own a 155mm howitzer or something if I have the money to purchase that?
Yeah, I really don't see a problem. It's one of these things that it becomes an economic limitation, right? And the thing is, if you want it, you can get it, whether it's legal or not, right? So, and
right, I understand that, but we are kind of living in the age of, I guess, billionaires at this stage. So, like, if there are no caps at all, presumably Jeff Bezos, he has enough money. Is he able to purchase a nuclear weapon? He has enough money to buy them. I mean, I think they're 500 million usually a pop. So.
Okay, so 500 million, and
I think he's worth 130 billion.
Well, but actually, but can you buy a nuclear weapon for 500 million? 'Cause, I mean, Iran's got a couple of billion, right? And they've been trying for years, and they can't get one.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of, so say this is just purely hypothetical, but if you're living in a country such as the United States, where there is the capacity to build nuclear weapons, that's a capacity that exists, and companies do it on behest of the government. Should it be legal for somebody who has the financial capital, just a private citizen, rather than the state, to actually purchase a nuclear weapon? I know it's a very extreme example, and it is highly unlikely, but I'm just wondering what your opinion on it is. If somebody was in the position where they could do that, do you think that should be allowed?
I think it should be allowed because, and it really is a really hypothetical question. I'll speak to that in a second, but I think it should be allowed because the only thing you can do with a prohibition, right? And I will challenge you to think of any time in history where a prohibition on anything, any size or any type, worked. The only thing you can do with a prohibition is keep the people who are willing to abide by that rule from doing it. So if you make a prohibition, like we tried alcohol, right? So the people who didn't want to drink, they didn't drink. The people who did want to drink, they drank, right? So if you have a prohibition, the only thing you're going to do is stop the people who are willing to comply. If he's got the money and he wants the nuclear bomb, there's nothing stopping him from getting it right now.
Well, that's fair.
And the reason I think
I have heard you can purchase them in Bulgaria, ex-Soviet ones, but I'm not even trying to argue with you. I'm just curious to see what your opinion is.
Yeah.
I think as well, though, like, it's not a prohibition that Pearson would be calling for. I think it's just as curiosity, but I think like laws are there to keep the people safe. So Jeff Bezos not being allowed to get a nuclear bomb keeps the people safe to a small bit. Now, it doesn't mean that he can't get one, but it's less likely that he'll be able to do so easily. So legalizing everything would make it much more easy and would allow it to get into the hands of people who you probably wouldn't want it in the hands of. Would you not agree?
No, because I've lived under that sort of mindset, and what happens is the people who want to do bad things, they do bad things, and the people who are trying to comply, they get victimized. So there was a gentleman, his name was Brian Aiken. He's written a book. He bought a gun legally in Colorado, and he was moving to New York. It would have been legal in both places, and we have something in this country called the Gun Owner Protection Act, where if you're traveling from one state to another with a firearm that was legal where you started and legal where you're going, you're protected. You don't have to worry about it being illegal anywhere in between. And so he stopped in New Jersey at his parents' house. The police discovered the firearm, and they arrested him. And they went to trial, right? And the attorney brought up, Gun Owners Protection Act. He brought up the traveling exemption. He brought up the fact that he was moving, and the judge instructed the jury to ignore all of those defenses, and said that you cannot consider any of that. All you can consider is if he had the gun, and if he had the gun, you have to find him guilty. And the jury came back 3 times and said, look, this is we've heard all this evidence. Why can't we consider it? And eventually they found him guilty. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail, right? And and eventually his sentence was committed, and it was later pardoned, and he got out. But it's like, here's a guy, right? He wasn't trying to rob a bank, right? The police didn't discover the gun while he was holding it at someone's face, right? He wasn't trying to rob a bank. He's just a guy with a gun. It's supposed to be allowed. This law is meant to keep us safe, right? But this law put him in jail. Yet we had another guy, right? Now, he was known to the police. I'm always suspicious when I say known to the police, but known to the police as a drug dealer. Found passed out on the courthouse steps with drugs and a gun. Right? He's out. Right? He didn't get convicted for gun possession. But the guy who was moving from Texas to Maine, right? He was moving, and in this country, it's illegal to put your guns in a moving truck. You got to move them yourself. Don't know why.
Okay.
But so he's moving. So he's got all 21 of his guns. Right? Sounds crazy, but believe me, it's normal. He's got all 21 of his guns in his truck. Right? Part of the Firearms or Gun Owners Protection Act is that all the guns have to be locked and in a case. So apparently, according to the police, he had 20 of his guns locked and in his case. One of his guns was not locked. It was in a case. And he was driving from Texas to Maine, and he stopped at a bank parking lot to sleep. Long drive. So he sleeps. The cops knock on the door. He's like, "What you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm moving from Texas to Maine. It's got all my stuff." He's still in jail. 20 years. Wasn't trying to rob a bank, right? There was no room, right? 21 guns in a pickup truck. There's no room to rob the bank, right? You'd have to leave the guns to take the money, right? Wasn't trying to rob the bank. Just moving, and he's in jail 20 years. We had a woman 2 years ago named Shanine Allen, and this one's important, right? Shanine Allen, she has a permit to carry her firearm in Pennsylvania, right? And again, it's owning your firearm, carrying your firearm, hunting with your firearm, 3 different sets of laws, right? She had a permit to carry her firearm in Pennsylvania, and she assumed that just like her driver's license, right? She can drive in New Jersey, she can drive in Pennsylvania, the same license. She assumed that her carry license would be good in New Jersey. And so much so that when she got pulled over for speeding, the cop says, "Do you have any weapons?" She says, "Oh, yeah, I have a weapon. Here's my weapon, and here's my carry permit." Right? She was arrested. And there was this big deal because they weren't going to negotiate on the charges. They were like, "Yeah, you're going to jail for 7 years. That's it." And the governor got involved and had the attorney general get involved. And when that was over, they said, this change that we're making today affects 100 active cases. Now, I don't know what the disposition process is like for criminal cases in Ireland, but it takes a year or two from the time that you get arrested to the time that you either go to trial or make a deal or what have you. So 2 years, that means 50 people a year that are not involved in any criminal activity other than legally possessing a gun and somehow getting caught up in the technical details are going to jail. And we see over and over and over again where people who are involved in criminal activity, the first thing the district attorney does is throw out the gun charge. So they'll be caught.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. But I think the philosophy is slightly flawed in the fact that you're saying because someone can do something that it should be legal because they'll do it anyway and there's access and there should be freedoms. But you could take that into the same vein in different fields, not just guns. If someone can, possess 10 kilograms of heroin and distribute it, that it should be legal just because they can't do it. And the fact that I could go down the street I could buy a Sherman tank and go down the street, and I could drive by a bank, but I can do that because I can because I can. It doesn't seem like a very fair philosophy to have for safety of citizens. And the government, although is flawed and the legal system does get things wrong in the cases that you mentioned, for the most part only tries to do that. And if you question the effectiveness of the government, you or the legal system, you kind of question the whole fundamentals of what your country is built on, including the Second Amendment.
If you go really, really, really far back, right? We were very, we didn't. The word libertarian didn't exist back then, right? We had the word classical liberal, or just liberal. Liberal changed so much that now we call it classical liberal. And I really do believe that the free market is what provides the regulation. Government just kind of comes in after the fact and taxes it and makes it more complicated and confusing. But what I believe is that every law is the justification for society to kill someone. And
recycling.
If it's a dog.
Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? So if you don't recycle, right? So in my state, I don't know what it's like there, but in my state, if you don't recycle, right, they will they'll fine you, right? If you don't pay the fine, right, they'll just keep adding interest until it gets astronomical, and then they'll put a lien on your property, including your house, right? And then they'll sell your house, right? And if you and all of this is like, if you're not recycling, there might be a reason, right? Maybe it's because you're lazy, or maybe it's just because you're really passionate, you don't believe in recycling, or or whatever it is, right? Yeah. But it comes down to, if you refuse to recycle, they will sell your house out from under you, and then if you don't leave, they'll send men with guns to evict you. And if you don't leave, they'll try and arrest you. And if you resist arrest, they will kill you. Ultimately, everything. You're saying, look, I am so right. It doesn't matter how wrong you think I am so right that I will and am morally justified in killing you if you don't abide by what I say.
Well, it's definitely a curious and interesting topic. In terms of the state having a monopoly on violence or legitimate violence, as it's put, and I would actually like to get into that in a few minutes. But James, do you want to just go to your second question first, and then we can get into that?
Yeah, sorry, I was so lost in that, James. I completely forgot. Very interesting, but I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, in the fact that gun ownership and concealment, that was where you were talking about it when I thought of the point. People were able to conceal guns or open carry or so on and so forth. In a fight, say for instance, one of the Second Amendment things, if someone is in, you're in direct danger, your property or your family, you can then use your gun to, in some states, kill the people. But the fact is, over here in Ireland, much European states, because we don't have a gun, we can't do that. And the only reason that I can use my gun is because I have it. So the only reason you're so scared of people robbing your house violently with guns is because you have them, and you need guns to protect them, so therefore you can use them. It's the same as if I'm in a street fight in Ireland. What's the worst that someone could do is pull a knife. If someone pulled a gun, that's a huge deal. Because of the Second Amendment, people have a different cultural idea of what a gun is, I think, in America. So it's more normalized, even though obviously it's never normal to pull a gun on anybody. It's just the fact that if you do have one and you can possess one, you can pull it and then use it yourself. But if you don't have one, you can't. I'd just like to hear your response on it.
Yeah, well, the first thing that jumped out at me there, you are more likely to die, and we have enough of this happening here to know, you're more likely to die from being stabbed than you are from being shot with a handgun. The stabbings are more fatal. And then on top of that, but though we have 2.8 million defensive uses of firearms in this country a year, and
you also have the most gun deaths of any country per capita.
But in fairness, the murder rate is largely the same compared to most Western European countries. It's just the item used is different. So the murder rate in America is largely similar to the murder rate in Britain. It's just more murders are committed with knives in Britain than with guns. The ratios are different in terms of what weapons are used, but the ratio of people dead per capita is about the same.
Interesting. I suppose.
So it brings up one of my guests, Belle McCormack. She was on my show and we talked for a while, and she was victim of domestic violence. Right now, I'm not going to guess how much she weighs because she might shoot me, but she's not.
That's her right, right?
Yeah.
Self-defense.
She's not a large woman, right? And she was married to a guy, right? Beat her up, right? He beat her up. She left. She took the kids. She went to a neighboring state, and while she's there, she says, "Can I get a restraining order, against my husband? He beat me up." And he said, "Well, we can't give you a restraining order unless he comes to this state and beats you up." So he came to that state, beat her up. She gets the restraining order, right? And then he comes back again, right? He beats her up again, takes her kids, right? Wow. And then the police get involved, and he's arrested. They gave him 20 days in jail, an $800 fine for that. And and so now you're going to say to this woman, just use a knife, right? Like, it's an equalizer, right? So it's something. I think a big part of the movement, the push to have firearms is that people are always trying to take them away. And there's a point in our gun control history that I can point to that I think illustrates that it's like, I know that the thing that's most likely going to kill me is heart disease. And after that, it's cancer, and after that, it's diabetes, right? And then if I go down the list, being killed in a violent encounter is way, way, way down, right? So, but it's because people are always trying to take that gun away that I have to focus on that. I mean, I'd much rather spend my time thinking about plant medicine or, nutrition, but there is always someone like just trying to take that gun away. And so that's where the attention goes. That's where the focus goes. And we like to joke over here that Barack Obama was the best gun salesman in history.
Yeah, I have heard that one.
And I mean, he would get on and he would say, we have to do something about gun violence. And I mean, there was a shortage, and I mean a shortage, for 8 years of AR-15s. There was a waiting list. There was, it was at least $1,000. It was, the ammo prices were going up, and, AR-15 substitutes, like if you can't buy an AR-15, you get this cheap knockoff of an AR-15, right? Everything was selling. People were buying it like it was like a tulip market, right? People were buying it like it was an investment. Like, these things are going to go up in value. People are buying parts, saving them for their kids, right? Trump gets elected. The industry has something they called the Trump slump, right? So you couldn't touch an AR-15 while Barack was in office for under $1,000. $350 now you can get an AR-15, and they'll throw in a mag, and they'll throw in a sling, and they'll throw in a case, and it's just like a race to find out how inexpensive. Because guys, for 8 years, guys were like, we need to buy more machines. Like they were just, we doing 2 shifts, 3 shifts in the factories. Right? Still can't produce them fast enough. Guys that make the steel for the barrels are buying more machines. Guys who make the ammo are buying. Now there's this surplus, right? There's that constant pressure of, you're going to take the guns away, and so people want to buy them more. So I think people are aware that they're not likely to be involved in, a deadly force encounter, but the fact that someone's going to take that away from them keeps putting their mind to it. And it's.
I think that's
really
more about psychology than safety, though. Honestly, like it's like if you take a child's toy away, they want it back immediately, even if they weren't playing with it. Even if you didn't have an AR-15 before that, you'd want one now. And I think in regards to the example that you said about the lady you were just talking about, like absolutely horrible circumstance, and the law was utterly against her until you bet her up in that state, and you said, and you're going to tell me she doesn't need a gun? I suppose what I'd say to that is guns are the most unequal or the most unnatural method of natural selection. It's like any foreign implement would be outweighs or unbalances the scales on who wins a fight. What happens if he had a gun, and he shot her first, whereas he's less inclined to kill her if he's just using his fists, even though that's utterly reprehensible all the same. And a knife is just the same. I'm not justifying a knife either.
All right. Well, we do. It's interesting that you call it the most unnatural. We call it the great equalizer, right? Because it does let a 98-pound woman defend herself against anyone. And one of the things, when you get into firearms training and you're learning about how to carry a firearm, what they teach you is situational awareness and preparedness. That's primary. I mean, that's so. One of the things we hear, is why would you need a gun in a school? Why would you need a gun in the post office? Why would you need a gun in a bar? The idea is, if you think you need a gun, don't go. Right? The gun is there in case you were wrong. So, if you talk about, why, you're going through your life, you're thinking, I'm going to make safe decisions. I'm going to be aware of my surroundings. I'm going to be watching people. I'm going to be alert. I'm not going to be walking with my head in my phone. I'm not going to be walking with both my hands full of things. I'm going to be looking around, being aware of my environment, not just for combative reasons, but for general safety reasons. And, when you have that mindset, the gun becomes just like a fire extinguisher, right? Like if you knew there was going to be a fire down the street, right, you wouldn't go with your fire extinguisher, right? You would just not go, or you would do something to prevent the fire, right? It's the same with a handgun. It's and especially we talk about it as being like this unnatural thing, but it's really more like a multi-tool than a combative weapon. If you knew you were going to be in a gunfight, the first answer would be don't go. Right? But if you were going to go anyway, right, you really wouldn't bring the handgun. You'd bring the rifle, and you'd bring friends, and you'd wear armor, and you'd have right. So the gun is really more like the Leatherman. Like, if your car breaks down and you're on the side of the road, you're grateful that you have that Leatherman there to help you get it back going, right? But if you knew you were going to fix your car, you wouldn't grab your Leatherman. You'd grab your full-size proper tools, and that's really what the handgun is. And it's like, that's why I mentioned that, knife wounds are more fatal than handgun wounds, because the handgun is really, it is the great equalizer. It lets the 98-pound woman defend herself against a 300-pound man, but it's not the instant lethal thing that the media likes to tell you it is. And, and that goes to magazine capacity too, which is the other thing that, the left is, over here we call the left is, they're constantly trying to limit magazines and certain types of firearms. But you think, why would anybody need 30 rounds? Well, if you can shoot someone 3 times and they don't stop coming, then that's, that kind of, so now you started with 30, now you're down to 10. And then when you factor in the fact that if you're moving, it's harder to hit something that's standing still. And if you're moving and they're moving, right, you're likely to miss. So it's, I don't know if I ever answered your question about.
Well, just an interesting point I would have. I honestly think Seamus might disagree with me here, but with the people I know, I think in Ireland anyway, and probably in most of Europe, most people would largely be okay with the idea of owning some kind of firearm in terms of for home defense. So, or owning a shotgun or something, just in case somebody breaks into your house. I think most people would largely be okay with that idea. I think what estranges us Europeans quite a bit is the idea of people just walking around with guns. So myself and Seamus are still relatively young. So I mean, we go out a lot, say in Dublin, and I'm not sure. Just it's not even a question of legal or philosophy here. I'm just not sure how much, if I would feel safe at all going out, say for a few drinks, if I thought that there was some potential that some guy doesn't like the look of me and we get into a fight and he pulls a gun on me. You know what I mean? I don't think most Europeans could reject. I'm sure there are some, but I think most wouldn't reject the idea of having a gun for home defense. I think it's the idea of carrying it around wherever you go kind of freaks us a bit.
Yeah, and following on from that, just the idea of you having to say like bigger magazines for different guns, and if someone's moving and you're moving, if you didn't have a gun, you wouldn't have to be in that situation where you'd have to worry about how many magazines you have or they have, like in the situation that Pierce wouldn't be that worried in Ireland.
You can only control, right? You can only control whether the good guy has the gun, right? So back to your bar. So I guess the first thing I should say, right, is that for all the guns we have in this country, right, we have very few bar fights involving firearms.
Fair.
It almost never happens, right? And we never, other people like, it's going to be the Wild West. People are going to be shooting each other over parking spaces. Doesn't happen.
No,
Doesn't happen, right? Gun violence is kind of the same as all other violence, right? Where you can kind of look to like it's going to either happen domestically or it's going to happen premeditated, in which case the gun control really not going to help, right? But we rarely have public breakdowns where people just get into fights with or without guns. And I'm sure it's the same way over there, right? But generally speaking, like I'm sure we can all remember a time where we saw two guys, lose it and have a fight. But like you guys been around 20, 30 years. It hasn't happened all that much, right? It's not the most common.
It depends what town you're in. Definitely Dublin is quite a safe place, but there's a town I come from nearby where it's not even like particularly dangerous fights, but fights definitely do break out outside nightclubs and stuff. I would like to move on though, and just curious because I think you yourself, you seem like a good insight into the general philosophy and mindset of many gun owners in America. So I am curious to hear your opinions on the role of government just in daily life, because I sympathize with you. I certainly have a libertarian streak in me. And I do probably think that Ireland's gun laws are a bit overly draconian. I'm sure that might be a controversial opinion here, especially since those gun laws largely came in to prevent the IRA from acquiring weapons. That was the main stuff, even though they just bought them off Gaddafi anyway. But
I was gonna say, did it work? Yeah, no.
Yeah, no, it didn't. But
you're an anarchist, man.
But I'm curious because I certainly have a libertarian streak, and I do think that it is certainly a moral grey area, at the very least, that the government has the right or the compunction to just, as we were talking about, if you don't pay your taxes, they just kick in your door and throw you in a cage.
Yeah.
And I completely understand where you're coming from there, and I certainly have sympathies with that as well. And that's the kind of question that would keep me awake at night. But at the same time, I do recognize we live in a highly technological society. We do live in highly urbanized societies, and there is a certain, in order to maintain the wonderful civilizations that we have today, especially here in the West, there is a certain amount of control, I think, that the government has to exert on its citizens, just in order to make sure that the fabric of society doesn't come apart at all altogether. I think it certainly is a question of how much control. I mean, can you use violence to force people to pay their taxes? But I'm just curious, where do you stand on that? Are you like a absolute libertarian or a classical liberal, I suppose, in terms of just the government should not be able, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you just don't have to, and then you don't get any of the benefits? Or where would you stand?
Yeah, Tom Woods, Murray Rothbard, Lou Rockwell, all the way. And if my listeners ever find out, they'll lynch me. But no, I believe stateless societies are really the way to go, because I hear what you're saying, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, what would you do differently today if the government wasn't forcing you to do, right? And then it's, well, if you would do the exact same thing today, if the government was not there, what would your neighbor do differently, right? And what would his neighbor do differently? And I think we kind of create this evil person that doesn't really exist. And in my country, I think it really is leftover racism, right? Nobody says we need these laws to protect us from the blacks, or we need these laws to protect us from the Indians, right? Nobody vocalizes that anymore, but they just say bad people. Well, who are these bad people? Why are you hanging out with them? Why are you living next to them? If you're surrounded by bad people, why don't you move? It's like there really aren't that many bad people out there.
I suppose though, James, it's not really what you can do. It's more so what you can't do, especially over here. Maybe not as much in America, but like if I wanted to go to the hospital or needed to go to the hospital, the government wouldn't be there to provide that for me. Or if I fell on hard times and I got sick and I needed support, that wouldn't be there, so on and so forth. So a stateless society is all well and good for single or married families that just want to live in the woods and hunt and do that. But if you want to live in a metropolitan society where you need subsidies and you need help sometimes, then the government is necessary in a way, regardless of what degree you mind the meddling in you. I don't know.
I mean, so Britain England just let an 8-year-old kid starve to death, right? Or not, or a 2-year-old kid starve to death.
They probably saved thousands of 2-year-old kids from not starving to death, though. It's like it's.
Well,
I mean,
but could it be done? Could it be done without the state?
well, it's just like that requires like a collective altruism that just reminds me of state mandated service, and I don't really see the difference, like, except that people are less likely to.
The big difference is if you don't do it, they can't kill you.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I guess for myself personally, it's a question of practicality. I certainly think the philosophy you embrace definitely works in smaller societies. So if we are naturally tribal creatures, and so if you're living in a tribe of 100 people, say, which is about as big as it ever got back when we were, pre-civilization. Direct democracy obviously works there because you actually feel like you're having an impact because if everybody voted on whatever issue the tribe was facing, everybody gets to pitch in and they actually feel like their vote has some impact because it's not millions of people voting. And there's a certain amount of morals that just can be enforced by the group through shaming, just because everybody knows each other. But I'm not sure that kind of philosophy works when you're talking in terms. I mean, in Europe, there's 550 million people living on this, and it's not a particularly big continent. Like America is quite a bit larger geographically, so maybe the kind of more libertarian style works there. But in Europe, it's a lot of cities, a lot of people packed into pretty dense areas, and I'm just not sure I would be willing to trust that 100% of the population is altruistic and is willing to pay, is willing to chip in to keep the society going, especially since so many people are on hard times now and so many people are disenfranchised. I'm just not sure that people will necessarily volunteer to do all the things that are required for a society to keep functioning.
Okay. I don't know if I can convince you today, but I'll work on it slowly over time.
That's interesting. I think it'd be a good, maybe next time, or if you go on the podcast again, we could definitely
discuss yours.
That. Yeah, to discuss that.
Yeah.
Because that's a really a very separate topic.
Issue, but it is interesting.
It is, yeah. But it's like you don't very much come across a separatist anarchist, I suppose.
Well, we certainly do have anarchists in Europe, but they're usually left wing. That's the funny thing. They're usually communal left wing anarchists, right? I guess anarchy is often seen as a left wing policy over here, but a lot of the anarchist movements would have spawned from communist movements in Europe, so that might be also why it has such a bad rap.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We renamed it anarcho-capitalism, so they didn't believe in property rights, so we took the word.
We're well aware. Would you like to tell us any other stories, perhaps about, or anything that you would say to a European audience that you wouldn't usually get to say? I know your podcast is primarily based in America, so I'll just give you the opportunity to talk yourself.
Oh, all right. So, if you have the chance and you have the opportunity, go shooting. I can't tell you how many times it comes up in my interviews where, I either ask somebody, what they do to get people into firearms, or I ask them what got them into firearms, and they always say, first time you hold a gun and you fire a gun, it makes sense, and you understand. And if you hate the idea of carrying and you hate the idea of combat, look into mindset and awareness training, and it's good to feel safe, and it feels really good to take responsibility for your own safety. And let's see, what else would I say?
Why do you think?
Largely racist. Go ahead. Gun owners are not largely racist, insensitive, child-hating people. We're family people. We're everybody that you talk to. Like in this country, it's almost half the population owns guns, or lives with someone that owns guns. I think if you take it, households, it's 60% of the households have guns. So,
Wow.
you think about if you've ever been at a bar in a city, well, if you're at a bar in a city in Philadelphia, then the guy next to you probably has a gun, and and life is fine. Whatever problems we have, we do not have the problem of people shooting each other at random, and I will leave it at that.
There you go.
That's perfect, James. And if you'd like to just tell everybody what your podcast is again, so they can tune in.
Sure. It is the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. You can find me at outoforderjameskaleda.com or Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast on iTunes.
It's been incredible to hear from you, James. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's
Taking
been
the time out
a
of
great
your day to
conversation.
talk to us.
So,
Yeah, we'd love to have you on again. And honestly, thanks very much. And at the end of the day, it's night.
If you're sick, you won't be well.
Thanks very much, James. And we'll talk to you soon.